Right, welcome everybody to Intro to Textural Embroidery. My name is Dana and I'm the editor of Fave Crafts. For those who are not familiar with Fave Crafts, we are a website that shares free craft tutorials from all over the internet. We have a variety of free email newsletters broken out by interest, including sewing, of course. We've got a crochet newsletter, recycled crafts, and more. You can sign up for any of our free newsletters when you visit favecrafts.com. We are recording today's class, few housekeeping things. We're recording today's class and you guys are all going to get a copy of the email in about 24 hours with the link to the recording. So keep an eye on your email for an email from Zoom with that link. You can use the Q&A feature to ask questions or the chat. Sometimes the chat moves quickly, as I'm still seeing as you folks are telling us where you're tuning in from. The Q&A is a nice spot to have your questions stand out. And we'll do our best to address all of the questions that you guys ask. I think that's everything for housekeeping right out the gate. And I want to introduce our instructor and also thank our sponsor. Today's class is sponsored by MCreativeJ, and our instructor today is Melissa Galbraith, who's the fiber artist behind MCreativeJ. Melissa shares her love of nature through whimsical and modern hand embroidery kits, patterns, workshops, and her book, How to Embroider Texture and Pattern, which is featured here on the screen. It's featuring 20 step-by-step embroidery projects of beautiful landscapes, desert canyons, unique flora, and more. How to Embroider Texture and Pattern is filled with vibrant embroidery patterns inspired by wanderlust that will challenge and grow your skills as you bring these beautiful outdoor scenes to life. You can see some of the examples from the book right here. Order your copy of Melissa's book at mcreativej.com/my-book. And I'm going to drop that link in the chat for you as well. All right, with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and welcome Melissa.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you could join me today. Well, let's go ahead and dive on in. First off, we want to place our fabric in our embroidery hoop. So to do that, we're just going to gently unscrew the top of our embroidery hoop here. And you want to do that so the inner ring easily pops out. And then you'll take that inner ring and lay it flat on the surface in front of you. Take your fabric and just lay that right on top. So that way it's all the way around your ring. And then we'll take our outer ring and sandwich it right on top. Just like so. And then we want to gently tighten our top screw here. And as you do that, you also want to tug your fabric along the edges a little bit. And this will ensure that your fabric is nice and taut inside the hoop. And sometimes it's a combination of tightening that top screw, tugging along the edges, tightening a little more, tugging some more. But you'll know your fabric is tight enough when you give it a tap and it sounds like a drum. If it's a little saggy like a hammock or you see some wrinkles in there, just go ahead and keep gently tugging that fabric along the edge there until it's drum tight. All right. We'll give everybody a minute or two here to get that fabric nice and ready to go. Yes. Yay, I see one thumbs up. That's always good. Great question, Joanne. Okay, so I'm using quilting cotton fabric for my embroidery here. You can stitch on any kind of fabric you want. Quilting cotton has like a minimal stretch, so it's not going to move around as much inside your embroidery hoop, but you can stitch on pretty much anything. Next, we want to go ahead and pick out some colors we're going to use today. The first stitch we're going to do is the fly stitch here, which is these fun V-like stitches. So go ahead and pick out the color you want to use for that. Oops. And you want to hold it with the barcode at the top here. So you see the little number code and the barcode. And then we will find our thread end here and hold it right by our nose and measure out an arm's length. And from there, we'll just cut it away from the thread, like so. And the arm's length is enough for you to work with your own arm, but not so much that your thread could get tangled up or caught in the back of your embroidery. You can always cut less. I just usually don't recommend cutting more. Now, Joanne asked how many threads we should use for our thread we're stitching with today. You'll notice there's actually 6 strands of thread in that embroidery thread that you cut away. I don't usually work with all 6 strands because it's pretty bulky and chunky. You can, and it creates some really great texture, but it's also kind of hard on your hands to stitch with. So I usually work with anywhere from like 2 to 4 strands of thread, but it also depends on what stitch I'm creating and what kind of texture I want to create with that. So feel free to use however many you want to use today. I'm going to grab 3 strands of thread. And when I split apart my thread, I pinch the very end, grab 1 strand at a time, and pull straight up so the thread bunches underneath my fingertips, like so. You'll lay that 1 strand down, flatten out that thread you pulled from, and then go in for another strand. And I like to grab 1 strand of thread at a time because when I grab more than 1, it usually becomes a big tangly knotted mess, which is just not very fun to deal with. Once we have our desired number of strands of thread, we just want to line them up at the end here. They're nice and even. And then I usually get my thread a little wet so they stick together, which means I'm going to put it in my mouth. Just so all those threads stick together. And then we want to hold our thread as close as you can to the end of your fingertips to glide that thread through the eye of your needle, like so. And once we have our needle threaded, we want a shorter side of thread and a longer side of thread. And we're going to put a knot on the long end of thread in just a minute here. So if you want to give me a thumbs up when you have your needle threaded, then I will show us knots.
Melissa, I have a question in the meantime. Lauren is asking, what kind of interfacing or stabilizer should we use in future stitching projects?
So if your piece is going to be left in the hoop, you don't necessarily need a stabilizer or interfacing. If you're stitching on like a garment or something like that, you could use some kind of stabilizer. So there are some that you could print your design onto and then stick that onto your fabric, stitch over, and it would act as a stabilizer as you're stitching. There are also some other ones that after you're done stitching, you could iron on the back. That would act as a little extra structure and protection to the back of your stitches. It kind of just depends on, I guess, what the end use of your embroidery is for.
Thank you. And then Sandra just jumped in and asked, are there any tips for embroidering on jersey fabric?
Yeah, so I would definitely use a stabilizer when you stitch on that because it is very stretchy. They make some like pin-on or like sticker-like stabilizers. I think Sulky makes them, so does DMC and Pellon, but they're kind of just like you would either print or draw your design onto the stabilizer, and then you kind of just peel off the backing like a sticker and stick it directly onto your garment as you're stitching, and that will add a little more structure. while you stitch and help with some of that stretch in your fabric and bounce it'll have as you stitch. Also, if it's a garment, I would probably not have your fabric as tight in the hoop, and that will also help cut down on some of the stretch you'll see.
Thank you. And then a couple more questions coming in, and then we can move forward. One person, I can't see the full name, is asking, what size needle are you using for 3 strands of thread?
Yeah, so I'm using a #1 John James needle. It's from their Sharps embroidery needle collection. I like it because it's a little longer and kind of easier for my hands. A #5 DMC is similar-ish. Usually I recommend getting like a sampler pack of embroidery needles and finding out which ones you like best. Some people like shorter, thinner needles. Some people like ones that are a little longer. Some people like ones with larger eyes. It kind of just depends on your personal preference. I think the important thing to keep in mind when you are choosing the embroidery needle is that as you stitch, you want to make sure that the needle isn't damaging the fabric. So when you like bring your needle through the fabric here, you want to make sure that it's not leaving a really big hole inside the fabric as you stitch. And otherwise you can pretty much use any needle you want.
Great, great. And then last question for now, Anne is asking, just to be clear, is this DMC cross stitch thread?
Oh yes, so I'm using your standard DMC 6-strand cotton thread today, just because it's pretty much the most accessible where I'm from, and most craft stores carry it. There are tons of different other embroidery threads out there. I know there's like Cosmo and Anchor and some that comes on spools and like some beautiful silk and hand dyed threads and things like that. You can pretty much embroider with anything you want. I'm just using DMC today because it's pretty accessible for me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. I see lots of thumbs up. So it looks like lots of us have our needle threaded, which is wonderful. So we want to add a knot to the long end of our thread here. And I like to do what's called the quilter's knot. So when my mom taught me to make a knot at the end of my embroidery thread, you would make a little knot and then try to make another knot on top of it at the end. And you just ended up with like a row of knots back there until they eventually became a big glob of a knot, and it seemed to take a while. So the quilter's knot is a little easier, I think, and gives you a solid knot all in one go. So to do this, we want to hold our needle pointy side up in our dominant hand. You want to take the very end of your long end of thread and cross that in front of your needle, so you have a little plus sign there. And where those two cross, we're going to pinch together between our thumb and finger that's holding our needle in our dominant hand. And in your other hand of thread, you'll have a loop of thread. We're going to take the top part of that loop and we want to wrap it around our needle 3 times, and any direction, it doesn't matter. So after you wrap, pinch all that together between your thumb and finger that's holding the needle, let go of our loop in the other hand, and then we're going to keep pinching all that thread we wrapped as we pull our needle straight up. So keep pinching all of our thread, and as we pull our needle up, kind of wrap our fingers around the thread so we don't unthread our needle, and we'll keep pulling till we get to the end of our thread, and you should have a knot. And I will show that again because I know it's a little funky the first couple times you do this. So for the quilter's knot, we have our shorter side of thread and our longer side of thread. Hold our needle pointy side up in our dominant hand. Take the very end of your long end of thread, cross that in front of our needle so you have a little plus sign, and then pinch those two together between your thumb and finger that's holding the needle. In your other hand, you'll have a loop of thread. We'll take the top part of that loop, wrap it around our needle 3 times, pinch all that wrap part together, let go of our loop, and then all that wrap part we're going to keep pinching as we pull our needle straight up. Making sure to wrap our fingers around our thread and keep pulling till you get to the end, and you should have a knot. All right, I see some more thumbs up and smiley faces, so that's good. It looks like we're getting some knots.
I feel like just between learning how to separate out the threads and learning how to do this knot, we've already gotten our value out of today's class. This is amazing.
So you will probably have a little bit of thread after your knot, and that's just because wherever you cross your thread in front of your needle is where your knot's going to be. So just go ahead and trim off that extra thread after your knot, and that way it won't get tangled up on the back of your fabric or pulled through to the front either. Trim that off there. All right, now we're finally going to get stitching. So we are going to do the fly stitch first, and this one looks like little V's, and you can do them individually or connected in a row. So to start, we're going to bring our needle up from the back of the fabric to the front, right at one of the top corners of our V here. And we're going to gently tug so you feel that knot nice and flush with the back of the fabric. And then we're going to hold our thread towards the bottom point of our V and bring our needle back down in the other top corner of the V there. And we're going to gently tug our thread so we have a nice open loop on the front of our fabric. Then we're going to bring our needle up inside that loop, right at the bottom point of our V, and gently tug towards the bottom point until our loop becomes a V on the front of our fabric. And then we're just going to make a short little stitch right on the outer edge of that V there to hold it in place, like so. You don't have to pencil the V onto the fabric if you don't want to. I drew these out just to make it a little easier for everyone to see today, but you do not have to draw on your fabric if you don't want to. You can just start stitching away and visualize the V. But to show you again, we'll bring our needle up right at the top corner of our V here. We're going to hold our thread towards the bottom point of the V and bring your needle up. Bring your needle back down in the other top corner there. We're going to gently tug our thread so you have a nice open loop on the front of your fabric. And then you're going to bring your needle up inside that loop right at the bottom point of your V. We're going to gently tug so your loop is flush with the fabric. And then we're just going to make a short little stitch right on the outside of your V there to hold it in place. Oops, my thread is caught on my hoop stand there. There we go. So these are individual flies, and if you want to connect them, you actually start with a straight stitch to begin with. So you can see there's kind of a line that runs through my V's here. So this first one, I'm just going to make a short little straight stitch at the top that would go down to the bottom point of my first V, like so. And then we make our fly. So again, come up at that top corner of our V here, hold our thread towards the bottom point, bring your needle back down into the fabric at that other top point of our V, gently tug so you have a nice open loop. And then we're going to bring our needle up at the bottom point of that straight stitch inside our loop here and gently tug so you get our V. And now normally when we would do our individual fly, we would make a short little stitch at the bottom, but we want to keep these connected. So we're actually just going to make a longer straight stitch that will go down to the next bottom point of our V here. And then we make our next fly. So top corner, fold towards the bottom, other top corner, Nice open loop. Come up at the bottom of our straight stitch there. Gently tug, and then go make our straight stitch down to the next bead, just like so. So we can connect these here. And the fly stitch is really great if you want to make birds or plants or vines, all sorts of fun stuff that you can do with this one. And they don't have to be super deep V's like this. They could be really shallow. So you have maybe like birds with really long wings, or you could layer them on top of one another to have plants that have different length leaves and things like that. You can really get creative with this stitch. Yes, bird footprints is another fun one. When we get to the end of our line of straight stitch, just like we ended our individual fly, we'll just do a short little stitch right on the other side of that V there to hold it in place, like so. All right. So I'm going to show you how to knot your thread on the back real quick, and then we will move on to the tulip stitch here. So when I knot my thread on the back of my fabric, I like to do a slip knot. So my thread's coming out of the back here. We're going to make a loop of thread, bring our needle through that loop, and where everything crosses, that's your knot. So we want to get that flush with the back of the fabric. So I like to stick my fingers inside of my loop, work it down so it's nice and close to the back there. Then I will hold it in place and just gently tug so my loop becomes a knot. And you just need to do that once, but I'm going to show it again. So we have our thread coming out of the back, cross our thread over itself, so we make a loop, bring your needle through that loop, and where everything crosses, that's your knot. Stick our fingers inside our loop, work it down so it's nice and close, hold it in place, and then just gently tug so your loop becomes a knot. And then you can just go ahead and cut your thread away from the back here. We want to cut it nice and close, just like so. And if you want to grab another color of thread for your tulip stitch, go ahead and do that. And we will get started in just a minute here while everyone kind of knots their thread on the back and gets ready with that.
Melissa, I've got two questions in the Q&A. One is related to the quilter's knot. Susan asked, if you need a larger knot for coarse grain fabric, can you make more rounds?
Yes, so the more times you wrap your thread around your needle for the quilter's knot, the larger the knot will be. The quilter's knot is actually very similar to the French knot. So similarly, the more times you wrap your thread around the needle, the larger the knot will be, and the fewer times you wrap, the smaller the knot will be.
Okay, great. And then Jalissa is asking, where do I get a cross stitch kit?
Do you mean like an embroidery kit that I make, or just in general? Or both?
That's a good question. If Jalissa, if you'd like to type in, go right ahead. It just says cross stitch kit. I imagine she's actually asking about what you have, though.
Okay. Well, I sell a bunch of nature-inspired embroidery kits that have a range of beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and you can get them at MCreativeJ.com. You can also find them on Etsy, and I have almost 200 stores that carry my work nationwide. So if you're on my website and you want to shop locally, you could just look for the different stores that are in your area and hopefully find a kit that you like. If you are looking for maybe something a little different, you can also look on Etsy, which is a really great option, or some of your local craft stores. I wouldn't go to like a big box craft store, but some more like local independent stores carry some really great artists that have more like modern designs. But Etsy is also a really great option. They have tons and tons of different embroidery kits and patterns.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll find the link on your site and I'll drop that in the chat here shortly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Let's go ahead and start with the tulip stitch next. So this one right here looks kind of like a tulip. It's a little bit like a flower. Have a knot at the end of our thread. So move this out of the way here. I will show that again real quick before we get started. So we have our short side of thread and our longer side of thread and our needle pointy side up. We're going to take the very end of our long end of thread, cross that in front of our needle so we have a plus sign, and then pinch those two together. Then in our other hand, we have our loop of thread. Take the top part of that loop, wrap it around our needle 3 times, pinch our wrap part together, let go of our loop, and then keep pinching that wrap as we pull our needle straight up. There we go. Just like so. All right, so for the tulip stitch, we are going to start with kind of this loop part first, and then we'll add that little V underneath. So to start, we're going to bring our needle up from the back of the fabric to the front, right at like the very top point of this loop right here. So right at the top point of our tulip. We're going to hold our thread towards the base of our tulip and go back down into the fabric right where we came up. And we're going to gently tug so we have another nice open loop on the front of our fabric. Now we want to bring our needle up inside that loop. Oopsies, don't pull your needle out. So bring your needle up inside your loop right there. And we're going to gently tug so your loop is flush with the fabric. And just like the fly stitch, we're going to make a short little stitch right at the bottom of our loop here. Oh, goodness, I just unthreaded part of my needle. Get this threaded real quick right here. There we go. All right, so you want to make a short little stitch right underneath our loop here. Like so. And now we need to add that little kind of V, almost like a fly stitch underneath our tulip here. So to do that, we're going to bring our needle up next to our loop here on one side. And then we're going to slide our needle underneath that little straight stitch right there and pull it through. And then go back down on the other side of our loop. So we're kind of making an equal little V there, like so. And that's the tulip stitch. So let me do that again. We want to start at the top of our tulip here. And we're going to hold our thread towards the base of our tulip and then bring our needle back down right at the top there. Same spot. And we're going to gently tug so we have a nice open loop on the front of our fabric. And then bring your needle up inside that loop right at the base of your tulip there. Remember, tug so it's nice and flush with the fabric. And then we're going to make a short little stitch right underneath our loop. Next, we're going to bring our needle up to one side of our loop here. And now we're going to slide our needle underneath that straight stitch. And then go back down on the other side of our loop here. to hold that in place, like so. And that is the tulip stitch. With this one, you can get a little fancier and add in like a color in the center of your loop there, or add additional little V's underneath to add some extra petals and things like that. But this right here is the basic part of the tulip stitch. And of course, kind of like the name suggests, you make fun little flowers, but I'm sure they could be like lots of other things too, like leaves, buds, plants, fire on a campsite if you wanted, all sorts of fun things.
Wonderful. Sandra is asking, is the first part of the tulip stitch the same as the chain stitch?
Yes, so the tulip stitch is kind of a variation on the chain stitch. So you actually make what's called like a detached chain or a lazy daisy stitch as that loop to start with.
Great. Okay, you've got a lot of compliments in the chat too. Ida says she's learning so much. Excellent instructor. Joanne says you're very descriptive and so easy to follow your instructions.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, if now's a good time, we can do a quick intermission, and folks can stand up, stretch, grab a glass of water, whatever they would like. And we're going to talk about upcoming classes and an offer from our digital magazine. So, all right, to begin, we have one class that you guys can sign up for at Eventbrite so far, which is a class called Learn to Block, Knit, and Crochet Projects. That is with Hortense Maskins from Knitting with Chopsticks. And that class is on Tuesday, May 23rd at 11 a.m. Central Time. You can sign up for that class at favecrafts.eventbrite.com. A few classes coming up that we don't have sign up pages for yet, but something to keep on the radar. On June 6th, we're going to be rebroadcasting our Learn to Crochet a Christmas Ornament class. That was with Tamara Kelly from Moogly Blog. It's a very popular class, and we're almost halfway to Christmas, so we are bringing that one back. And then later in June, we have a new class called Learn to Make Clay Earrings. That is with Rebecca George from Purple and Lime, and that class is sponsored by Polyform. So she's going to be using Sculpey clays to demonstrate how to make some beautiful, modern, desert-inspired clay earrings. So keep an eye on our Eventbrite page for those class sign-up links as we add them. The ornament class will be up soon, so keep an eye out. And then I'm gonna move our little person bubble. Oh no, you can see fine. Okay. As a special offer, that we always make this offer to our class attendees as a thank you for attending our Studio Live classes. We have a digital magazine called We Like Sewing that publishes 6 times a year. It's pretty new. It launched, I think, in 2021. And when you sign up for the magazine, you get access to all of the previously published patterns, which is kind of the fun advantage of a digital magazine. New subscribers can sign up for $5 US. It's ads free because it is a subscription, and you get all of these beautiful tech edited patterns 6 times a year. So the link to sign up for the digital magazine is welikesewing.com/sewing23. I will drop the Eventbrite link and the digital magazine link in the chat shortly as we continue to the second half of today's embroidery class. All right. Okay, thanks so much, Melissa.
Of course. Yeah, while you were chatting, I think we also got a question about the hoop stand I'm using here. So this one is one that you can adjust based on the hoop size you have, and it sits on the tabletop. I got this one on Amazon. You can find a lot of options on like Etsy and different things too. This is a tabletop stand. They also make ones that are considered floor stands that would sit on the floor, and then kind of the embroidery would fold into your lap. And then they also make some what are considered like sit stands. So they have like a little paddle that you would sit on, and then the hoop holder would kind of hold into your lap as well too. I like this one because it has 2 kind of grippers to hold your hoop, and it's very adjustable. I just find that when I hold my hoop for a long period of time, my hands kind of cramp up. So this is really helpful. And some of the stitches you do require both your hands. So it's just nice to have something else that will hold your hoop for you. Okay, so now we're going to do the Danish knot. So this is a triangular knot right here, and maybe something you haven't seen before. It's actually one of my favorite knots to make. If it's helpful, you could draw a little triangle on your fabric, but you do not have to. So just like last time, we want to have our thread ready with a knot at the end there. All right, so we are going to bring our needle up right at the top point of our triangle. And now we're going to make a straight stitch down one side of our triangle here, like so. Then we want to bring our needle up in the other bottom corner of your triangle. Now we're kind of going to start looping our thread around this straight stitch to get our knot. So we're going to bring our needle underneath our straight stitch towards the thread that's coming out of the fabric, and you want to make sure your needle is above that thread to start with. And we're going to gently tug so that thread is now flush with the fabric. And we're going to do this again. So next we're going to bring our needle underneath that straight stitch, and then we want to go under, have our needle below our thread that's coming out of the fabric, and above, then go over the thread there. And then again, gently tug. So you're almost making a loop with this stitch. We want to tug just enough so everything's nice and flush, and then bring your needle back down in that bottom corner again, like so. So let me do that again because I know it's a little funky when you first get started. So bring your needle up at the top corner of your top point of your triangle here, and then we want to make a straight stitch down one side of our triangle. Then we want to bring our needle up in the other bottom corner of our triangle right there. And now we're going to slide our needle underneath that straight stitch towards our thread that's coming out of the fabric. And we want to make sure this time our needle is above that thread. We're going to gently tug so that thread is nice and flush with the fabric. And we want to make sure this straight stitch isn't kind of bending too much. Now we're going to repeat this. We're going to bring our needle underneath that straight stitch, now going below our thread, and then over that other thread we have coming out of the fabric here. And then again, gently tug so everything is flush with the fabric. And then go back down in that bottom corner again, like so. That is your Danish knot. This one always kind of reminds me of like almost like a Celtic knot because it wraps up so nicely in there. But it's such a fun shape and it makes really beautiful, like you could use it for flowers. I've also used it on like gourds to make some of that really fun knobbly texture. The more strands you use, the thicker it will be and it will kind of pop away from the fabric. So you can really create some fun texture with this stitch. And I'll fill in this last triangle we have here. So bring your needle up at that top point. Make a straight stitch down one side here. You want to bring our needle up in the other bottom corner of your triangle. Now we're going to slide our needle underneath our straight stitch and above that thread that's coming out of the fabric. Gently tug so that thread is now flush with the fabric. I'm going to do this again. Bring your needle underneath your straight stitch, below all of that loop thread there, and over your thread that's hanging right there. And then we're going to gently tug. And then bring your needle back down in that bottom corner again. And that is the Danish knot. Yay, a new knot for a few people. I love to hear that. All right. So our last stitch we're going to cover today is the cast on stitch. And this one is kind of similar looking to the bullion knot, in the fact that it kind of is like a long knot that lays flush with the fabric, but it has a little bit of a twist to it. And you can also change the size and make some fun like loopy stitches here too.
Hey, Melissa, before we move on, if we have time, there are a few people actually asking to see the Danish knot one more time.
Yeah, of course. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we want to bring our needle up at the top of our triangle for the Danish knot. We want to go down one side of our triangle here with a straight stitch. And then we're going to bring our needle up in the other bottom corner of our triangle. Now we're going to slide our needle underneath our straight stitch towards our thread that's coming out of the fabric. And we want to make sure this time our needle is going above that thread. So, and gently tug. So that's flush with the fabric. We're going to do that again. Bring your needle underneath your straight stitch that's on the side there, going below that thread you just wrapped around that straight stitch, and then bring your needle over that thread that's hanging out of the fabric there. And gently tug so everything is nice and wrapped together. And then bring your needle back down in that bottom corner again. Like so. Let's see.
Asking. Oh, yep. I think you see your question.
Would you have the first straight stitch on any of the other sides? Would that create a different focus? I don't think so. Depending upon how you're doing the Danish knot, if you tug really tightly, then it will kind of pull that straight stitch and everything closer in towards the center of your triangle and might look like you have some little like legs sticking out of your knot. And that could possibly, if you changed the side that you had your straight stitch on, then you could change the focus on it. With the Danish knot, it is a little bit of a looser knot, whereas some knots like the French and colonial knot and even the bullion knot, you want to wrap really tightly around your needle. With this one, your thread's kind of looping around itself on the front of the fabric, and you want it to fill in that triangular space. So it's a little looser than some of the other knots you've done.
Barbara is asking, can you use the Danish knot technique to make a larger triangle?
You can. I would probably use more strands of thread if you were going to do that, just because the fewer strands of thread you use, the thinner it is, and so there's less like thin on your triangle. You can go larger. Just know that the part that's going to wrap around the center of your knot is going to kind of be looser and not as filled in on the front, like inside that triangular section. All right, let's go ahead and knot the thread off on the back, and then we will do the cast on stitch next. I'm going to grab some more thread for this one, so give me just a moment here. I think we'll switch up our colors. Maybe use a bold orange here.
Melissa, I think before this comment disappears entirely, Wendy said a minute ago, this is the first time I've attended one of Melissa's lessons and can honestly say she is the calmest, easy to understand and follow tutor I've had the pleasure to learn from.
Oh, thank you.
We don't get a whole lot of compliments on teaching style throughout the class. Usually that all comes at the end. So this is pretty standout that we're getting so many throughout the class.
Well, thank you. All right. So we're going to do the cast on stitch class today. And again, this is this fun kind of like wiggly stitch right here. So we're going to start with one that lays pretty flat with the fabric, and then I'll show you how to do this more loopy effect here in just a minute. So to do that, we're going to bring our needle up on one side of where we want this line to go. And then we're going to go back down into our fabric at the other end of our line and pop your needle up right next to where you came out. So it'll look like this. Your needle's kind of sitting in your fabric right there. All right. Now, kind of like the name suggests, cast on, we're going to cast our thread onto the pointy part of our needle right here. So I find it's helpful to kind of prop your finger underneath your needle here. And then if you've done the bullion knot, it is very similar to this, but instead of just wrapping your thread around your needle, we're actually going to twist our thread so it makes a little loop, and then pop that loop onto our needle right there. So you can kind of see it loops around your needle. So I'm not holding my finger under here just to make it a little easier to see this for you, but just want to make a loop with your thread. And then we're going to slide that loop onto our needle and then gently tug so it's nice and flush with your needle there. And we want all these cast-ons to be right next to one another. So again, we'll twist our thread so we have a little loop. Slide that loop onto your needle there, and then gently tug so it's right next to that last cast-on stitch you made. We want to do this until we fill in basically the amount of this straight stitch that we have our needle going through. So I'm going to keep making my loops, sliding them onto my needle here until we filled in that space. Okay, I think we're pretty close. Let's see here. Maybe do like one more. All right, so you can see my cast on stitches here are about the same size as that space that my needle is going in and out of the fabric. So now all those stitches I've done, I'm going to pinch together between my thumb and finger, and I'm going to gently tug my needle through the fabric and keep going until all that extra thread is now kind of taut like this. And then we want to pull back towards the other side of our line here and kind of smush down your cast on stitches so they're nice and flush with the fabric. And then we're going to bring our needle back down right on the other end of our line here, like so. And then you get this fun little line that kind of has a little bit of a wave called the cast on stitch in the front of your fabric. Yes, the cast ons are very similar to half hitches, like somebody was asking. So let's do this again. We're going to bring our needle up on one side of our little line here. And we're going to go back down at the other side of our line and bring your needle up right next to where you came up. And I like to kind of push my needle pretty far so that way you have more space to have your cast on stitches, but that it's still inside the fabric there. And then we are going to make our loops. So twist your thread and that onto the needle there. And have them sit right next to one another. So pretty close here, maybe like a loop or two more. All right, that looks pretty close to that size. So we have all of our cast on stitches there. We're just going to pinch them together, gently tug our needle through the fabric, pulling through all those stitches, and tug, 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 tug until all of our thread is pulled through the fabric. And then we want to pull back towards the other side of our line here and smush our cast on stitches down so they're flush with the fabric. And then we'll go back down at the end of our line, right like so. And that is our cast on stitch as a straight line. So this is it as a line, but if you wanted to make it more as like a fun loop, kind of like these stitches right here, you just make a shorter stitch into the fabric and create more cast on stitches than the space. So to do that, I'll just start with this short little line right here. So bring your needle up. Oops, got a little knot on the back. There we go. Go back down into the fabric. Pop your needle up right next to where you were. Now we want to add our cast on stitches. So get some loops here. Remember, we want this one to pop away from the fabric, so we're going to add more loops than our line, than is in that little line there of our fabric. Depending upon how big of a loop you want these to be, you might have like double the stitches compared to that space, or maybe just a few more than that. So depending, like if you want it to just kind of be a little bit further away from the fabric or really far away from the fabric, up to you. All right, that looks like quite a few stitches compared to that little space we have here. Yep. All right, so again, pinch it all together. Pull your needle through the fabric and our stitches. And then just like last time, we're going to kind of smush these down as best we can. And then go back down right where you came up. And you can see this one is more of like a little loop that sits away from the fabric than these guys that are more flush. That is the cast on stitch. And you can make all sorts of cool textures with this one too.
Barb has a great question here, which is, what if you don't cover the line? Like you don't make enough cast on stitches. How do you fix it?
So basically you're just going to have a little bit of thread that sits out on either side of your cast on stitch. And that's okay. It just means that you're going to see some like straight stitches underneath your line there. But once you've kind of started pulling your needle through that thread, it's kind of hard to add on more cast on stitches afterwards. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend trying to do that because it would be challenging to like make that loop and like slide it down towards the other ones. So if you end up just having less cast on stitches than your straight line, just know you'll have like little straight stitches that kind of stick out on either side a little bit.
Great. And then I have one more question. Susan's asking, have you heard of the turkey work? I've seen other videos and don't understand.
Yeah, let me grab a sample real quick. Right here. So these like little yellow little poofs are turkey work right here. And it's kind of making loops on the front of your fabric that are locked in at the bottom. So it's basically like you make a loop and then you make a little back stitch over it. And then you come up inside that loop and make another one until you've kind of gone in a straight line and then added lines close together to fill in enough of your space right there. And you can leave those loops on the front if you want, or you can cut it down to get these fun little like more carpet-like pom-pom poofs. It just depends on what you're looking for. This is actually one of the patterns from my book, and turkey work is included in there. So it kind of walks you through step by step with different photos on how to create these fun little pom-pom centers for these flowers.
Great. I see the chat that Ida's asking if you can come back with more stitches. So maybe I'll be sending you an email after the class, Melissa. We would love to have you back. This was a great class. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions at this time, and we are out of time. We only have 1 minute left. Lots of compliments and thanks, which is so wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time because we have our thank you slide here. Let me move the little video box so that you guys can see the link to Melissa's book. So thank you again so much, Melissa, for joining us today. If you are not already following Melissa on her various social media, her handle is MCreativeJ on Facebook, on Instagram, Pinterest. I had dropped the link to her Etsy shop in the chat earlier, and you can find all those other links to her patterns and kits, and of course her book at mcreativej.com. If you loved the class today, loved the stitches, want to learn more, be sure to order your copy today on her website, mcreativej.com/my-book. And if anybody has questions about Fave Craft Studio Live, my email address is right there, so you guys can reach out to me anytime about our classes. All right, thank you again so much, Melissa, for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. It was wonderful being here.
Loved having you. Have a good one.
Bye.